So our next session is actually going to a couple of speakers who are real, I think, world experts on some of these topics. And I'm proud to have worked with both of them over the years. We've got, first of all, Pierre Langlois, who is the president of Econolair. Econolair is, I think, 40 years old. Pierre can tell us exactly, but 40 years of doing energy efficiency work around the world. I think they were one of the real pioneers in this and have done a lot of work, including in the Philippines, including in this region, but all over the world, thinking about how to solve these questions of energy efficiency financing. So I'm really pleased Pierre's joining us today. He's in Quebec City, which is a very good city, as we know, Pierre, but it's also very late there. So we really thank him for joining us to share some of his insight and wisdom on the experience of Econolair and his own personal experience in unlocking energy efficiency financing. So as you're thinking this through, hopefully Pierre can also give you some ideas and start to point towards some possible solutions. Pierre, thanks again, and please go ahead.
Hi, Mark. So you hear me well?
Yes, perfectly. Good evening.
Perfect. And good evening, good morning to you. And you see the slides?
Yeah, you can take them to full screen and go ahead.
All good. All good. So thank you very much for having me, and sorry not to be able to be there in presence. Actually, I'm indeed based in Quebec City, Canada. And the challenge for me is not only that it's a little bit late, but furthermore, that you only gave me 10 minutes to talk about such an important topic. So it's quite challenging for me to try to be entertaining your guests and experts in the field within only 10 minutes. So I'll try to be brief, and I tried to focus essentially in a couple of things. So I thought that maybe the most interesting thing for me to just share a little bit of the best practices that Econolair had over the years. You're right, Mark, that we've been there for 40 years. We work in 160 countries, including the Philippines. I had the chance to work there many years ago. And out of all the financial analysis that we've done and work on the financial mechanism, there's a couple of best practices that we thought that I thought that I could share with you. And then I'll go to some of the examples that I can share with you very, very rapidly, and potentially share more additional information through emails and additional documents that I could share. So I think as far as the models, and there's so many models adapted to energy efficiency financing, I think the first thing to have to recognize is we have to adapt the financial mechanism to the specific particularities of energy efficiency. Money is there, financing capacity is there. In most countries, I rarely have seen a countries where that was not the case, but there's been always a difficulty to address energy efficiency because it's so specialized. So we're talking about technical projects, as you know, we're talking about the recognition that the asset itself is not the real value, but the generation of positive cash flow is. And it needs to be adapted to all local situations. Not two are the same, and I'll give you some examples from different parts of the world, and you'll see that the mechanisms that were developed were so adapted to their local situations. So it's just not copy-paste. What's good for one place is not necessarily good for the other. And I think the other thing that we have to think about, it has to evolve over time. Whatever financial mechanism is designed by a bank, by a financial institution, an international financial institution, a bilateral or whatever, it's always at a certain moment, and the actual mechanism will actually be operational a few years later. And we have to think about the evolution in the market. Things are moving very rapidly in all countries, and we cannot be stuck in time. So it has to be designed as an evolving mechanism and not as a mechanism that's stuck into a concept that was good at the design time, but not at the implementation time. We need to work on both sides of the equation. And Mark, you know that, and we've been working together in different countries. If you only work on the supply side, it doesn't work. If you only work on the demand side, it doesn't work, meaning that you create a pipeline of project with no financing, it will generate the market that we want, and you cannot just work on creating the financial mechanism. And if there's no demand and there's no market, it doesn't work either. So we have to work on both sides of the equation. And the good financing program principles, it has to be commercially oriented. So it's nice to subsidize things at some point. It's nice to give some advantages to some initial initiatives, but at the end, it has to be commercial oriented. It has to be demand driven, meaning that it has to meet the market demand and not try to force something on people. And it has to be flexible, linking to the point that it has to be able to evolve over time. So the flexibility has always been key in the successful mechanism that we developed and participated in. Focus on the key elements. Well, we always need appropriate marketing. It's not because we have a financial mechanism that is adapted to a market that it will necessarily work by itself. We need to be able to present it in the market, go out there and be present in such market with the marketing capacity. We have to have a delivery, an efficient delivery mechanism. That's kind of obvious, but sometimes what failed in the mechanism that were developed is essentially that the capacity to react to a request, to adapt to a market was not there. So we have to be able to deliver. The technical support to address any implementation hurdles is very often needed. Obviously, that's the kind of work that they call there, and Mark would do, and others would do in market. So we've been there, we've worked on different mechanisms, and we try to support any kind of thing that may happen that can limit the development of a market. Mix of different instruments and products. The most successful mechanism that we had essentially had flexibility in how it operated, but also on the type of mechanism that could be used. And I'll give you a specific example of Bulgaria in a second on this. The mechanisms are diverse because the market is very different. The size of the projects are different. The actors are different. I've heard a little bit prior that some people talked about ESCOs, some people talked about direct lending and all that. So you see just the mechanism to be used is different. So we have to have different products for different markets. And we have to show results. At some point, if we're not able to demonstrate that the system works, we're going to lose interest by the decision maker, the banks that are involved, the international institutions that are supporting. We have to be proactively promoting projects and the financing that goes with it if we want the mechanism to result over time. So just a few examples, and I'm sure I'm going to go way too fast, but just to give you a little bit of a flavor of the type of things that have been developed. So in China, we work on large investment. That mechanism that was financed by KfW essentially financed over $1.5 billion worth of energy efficiency project. The China Exim Bank was the recipient of the KfW support and some of the lending they done to them, but they essentially used their own money. So the fact that KfW was there was not fundamental, but it was there to trigger the initiative. 70% debt, 30% equity from investors, going through a special purpose vehicle. That's very well adapted for large investment. So we're talking about several $7 million worth of projects per initiatives. And obviously we're talking about China. So as soon as we talk about China, size is different. So that thing kind of worked, and we're able to put into these SPVs different type of projects. So we had the big industrial, we had the cogeneration, we had the biomass, we had a lot of things that could go into that. And the concept was always the same. So develop, install, and own energy efficiency projects, perform savings, measurement, and verification, receive host payments, obviously, pay contractors, lenders, and all actors, and essentially work through either one or a few projects at a time. So the concept is very vanilla, as I would say. It works very well for large investment, but China is not necessarily representative of what we have in other countries. To the other extreme, we work on something in Egypt with UNDP that was very innovative, because then we were talking about very, very small projects. The type of $25,000 deal that's more common in emerging economies. And we essentially work with a guarantee mechanism. So we wanted banks at the end of the day to be able to work with projects. So we work with a credit facility, and we essentially guarantee the credit facility itself. So by guaranteeing the credit facility with what we had as a support grant from UNDP, we were able to trigger more interest, and they actually were able to guarantee the local bank, which was requesting some limited investment by the intermediaries, the end user, the people who were actually promoting the projects. And these intermediaries were essentially working with the end users, financing the project on a short-term basis, less than 2 years, and they had to have their repayment done within those 2 years, repay the local bank that was not using the guarantee. And as long as they were able to demonstrate that that was working, they were able to get more guarantees. So we had an Egyptian consulting center in the middle of all that, that was essentially making sure that everything was working smoothly. The guarantee company support, the local bank capacity building, the intermediary motivation at some point, and certification to make sure we had the right people. And we had the end user that were essentially selected by the intermediary, putting the burden on themselves to make sure to make sure that the project was working. Incredibly, that mechanism, even though it didn't have a lot of money, it has essentially like $250,000 at the beginning, we're able to revolve over 40 times over a period of 5 years. So we were able to implement 40 more times the amount than the actual initial guarantee. So that was a little gesture by UNDP, a little initiative that essentially triggered quite a lot of interest by the market and enabled the private sector to work through local banks as far as energy efficiency financing. Bulgaria is quite of an interesting one. It worked with the World Bank. That's called the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Sustainable Financing Mechanism. We call it more commonly the Bulgarian Energy Efficiency Fund. Essentially a very well designed fund. It's not a Collier who designed it. We've been just managing it for the last 17 years. It's a public-private sector partnership. The concept is pretty interesting because under the same mechanism, it's a dedicated mechanism, but it acts as a bank at some point, but essentially offer different products. Would it be direct lending, co-lending with banks, be able to have guarantees to banks or having portfolio guarantees, working with ESCOs and other type of actors who are able to bring many projects together. And the idea was to essentially bring an added value to the market. If there were grants, they were insufficient, obviously, and too bureaucratic to address very often. We had the banks at the time when the initiative was launched. They were more expensive. There was a lot of barriers in the way they operated, and they did not consider very often the type of energy efficiency project that were presented. And you had ESCOs that were interested in moving the market in, but they had no place to go with their projects. So the Bulgarian Energy Efficiency Fund essentially worked as an intermediation initiative to enable a lot of the different type of projects to go forward, and essentially using market forces. And that was kind of the lesson learned as well. Those market forces as to be key to any financial mechanism. Would it be the banks themselves, which in this case we help, but that could be the leader on this? Would it be the end user, obviously, in the market needs? Would it be the ESCOs or any kind of intermediaries? You need all the pieces to work well if we want the financial mechanism to work at the end. And last but not least, our latest venue in all this, Ecolair just created the private super ESCO structure in Canada, which is strong of $200 million, and the super ESCO, maybe you've been presented a little bit the concept. But what was interesting is we have banks in Canada. It's a very liquid market. People are very interested in working through ESG and working for energy efficiency projects and generating carbon emission reductions. But even then, the investors had a lot of trouble working on a one project at a time basis. And even though our projects are relatively large, there could be from $1 million to $20 million. The banks had difficulty to assess them because they didn't have the expertise, because they thought the project were too small at the time, or just the complexity of different technologies, different schemes were difficult for them. So we essentially brought investment banks, pension funds, and companies were able to lend to the facility to bring up to $200 million. And the SOFIAC, which acts as the super ESCO, essentially acts as the beneficiary of this funding, and then start operating as an ESCO on one side with the clients and working through ESCOs as we're paying the ESCO to implement the projects. And through this, we have extended the period, the contractual agreement, to 10, 15 years, essentially because the goal here was to decarbonize, if not totally, at least quite significantly, so up to 80%, very often the project we're implementing. So as an example, we're doing currently the airport of Montreal, so the two major airports that we have in Montreal, project of about $25 million value that will essentially decarbonize the two airports by over 90%. And the beauty of the mechanism here is that even though we brought financing together, the customer itself doesn't have to get any financing on its side. So there's no upfront investment for customers. All the technical, financial, and operational risk are taken by the Super ESCO. There's no impact on the client borrowing capacity, which is very often a limitation because clients do have the capacity to borrow, but do not want to use such capacity for implementing such projects that they're not either comfortable with or either they think that it's not core to their activities. So that mechanism of Super ESCO is one of the things that can be used as well. A long time ago when I worked in the Philippines, we thought about a system like that, but more recently we developed or we supported the development of one in India with KfW that became ESL. The one in Dubai that is better known related to a new Super ESCO there. And there's a couple of spin-off all of that, one in Abu Dhabi and one in Saudi Arabia that are quite successful and use a little bit the same mechanism. All of those work, at least the one in the Middle East, work more in the public sector. The one in Canada, that's called SOFIAC, is essentially working only on private sector and bringing only private sector financing, which is interesting. So in order to not lose, to spend two more time, two last slides, the key at the end is to use the right instrument. Depending of the evolution of the market, we will need more government support, but it has to move from grants at some point and global government support to total private sector financing. And there's a lot of layers there that can be brought up. But the thing is, any mechanism can be good as long as it's adapted to its market and it's adapted to the conditions of the market. And last but not least is the conclusions. We have to look at the barriers in each market and remove them. So each financial mechanism has to be adapted to the local market. It has to be adapted to the local conditions. Different market can be used or different mechanisms can be used depending on the needs, and choosing the right instrument is essential. So no copy paste, no because it worked in China, Egypt, Bulgaria, or Canada, it will work in the Philippines. But there's a lot of expertise outside. There's a lot of experiences that can be shared. And probably through some of those, each of you can find the right approach that would enable the project financing to become a reality and enable these energy efficiency or viable energy efficiency projects to be implemented in the Philippines. So Mark, hopefully I kept the time and hopefully it was a little bit of added value to your discussions.
Thank you, Pierre. I think that's worth a round of applause, to be honest. I think you can see maybe, probably the thought that was coming to my mind is, Pierre is the sort of guy who probably forgot more about energy efficiency than I'll ever know. He's been doing this for a long time and some really interesting, successful models there to share with the audience. I think it's when you've been working in this energy efficiency area, you've seen a lot of these diagrams of the financiers and the ESCO and the customer and where all the things are flowing. But I think it's very useful to have those models in people's minds, thinking about how could this work for us? How could this actually be something we could utilize as a model in the Philippines? Looking at the ESCO sector, which is not really well understood and well developed in the eyes of the banks. I want to acknowledge Alex Sablaza again, who is not only leading the way through Climagy, but also is the president of the Philippines Energy Efficiency Alliance, which is bringing together ESCOs in the country, someone that you should probably know. Conscious that it's very late for you, Pierre, and thanks again for the efforts that you put in. I just want to, before we go across to our other presenter, who is extremely early, on the other side of the world, Ashok, who's on screen. I just want to check whether there's any questions for Pierre. Otherwise, we can release him to the rest of his evening. Does anybody have any questions for Pierre that they'd like to ask? Okay, Pierre, I think you've stunned them all. There's nothing coming back, but yeah, I just thought I'd check.
So Mark, just thank you very much for the invitation. A nice hello to Alex who's there, and I'll stick around for Ashok Sarkar, which I always like to hear from. So I'll stick around for 15 minutes for sure.
Great, thank you, Pierre. Yes, and it's true. We are very much with these two speakers in this session. We're in the presence of energy efficiency greatness. Both of these guys have been involved for a long, long time in these questions and actually going through and successfully answering some of the questions. Ashok is with the World Bank and I think is now based in Jerusalem after a very long time working in various countries on these issues, including in India with a very successful model there. I think he's actually on a work mission in Cairo at the moment. Is that right, Ashok? Which I think makes it five something in the morning for him. So we're going from very late night to very early morning, and I'm amazed that you can be awake and function at this time. So if you are awake and you are functioning and you're excited to talk about energy efficiency at this time of the morning, please go ahead, Ashok, and share with the audience some of your perspectives on financing and the many amazing things that you've done and the impacts that you've had in various countries. Please go ahead and welcome.
Thank you very much, Mark, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone, as well as good evening to Pierre. I hope you can hear me. That's the first thing I'm going to check with you.
Yes, it's working fine. Go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I guess in the World Bank, we are used to working in early hours or late hours, so it was not a very big deal. But yeah, I'm here in Cairo on a work trip, working towards certain areas which are leading up to the COP27, as you know, in Sharm el-Sheikh later this year. But also energy efficiency is very much a part of many of the discussions that we have been having with the government of Egypt. But let me again thank you and the organizers for this opportunity. And I'm sorry that I could not attend the earlier sessions, and a lot must have been covered. So what I'll try to do with the next 10-15 minutes is to really give a snapshot of what we have learned through our experiences at the World Bank, which has been primarily in the case of developing countries, and sort of exchanging best practices and models and mechanisms from one country to another, as Pierre was explaining, in a way that it works, and in a way that it could be adapted effectively to get the results. And the results here are ultimately energy savings and GHG emissions. And I think Pierre covered a lot of the basics. So what I will do is, again, I have a slide deck, but I'm going to skip through many of those slides while I speak. But first of all, let me see if I can, let me make sure that you can see my slide.
Yes, I think it's working amazingly. Okay, you can move to full screen.
Yeah. The size is okay.
Yeah, I hope so. It looks perfect on the screen. Go ahead, Ashok.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I mean, again, what I have here is not necessarily brand new material in terms of, you know, what I'm going to present. Much of this we have shared in many earlier presentations, including with the government of Philippines. I remember there was a delegation which visited our office in Washington, D.C. in 2018, November, which was very much focused on finding ways to promote energy efficiency investments in the Philippines, particularly in the demand side energy efficiency. And we had used much of this knowledge and lessons learned and best practices from around the world with that particular delegation as well. So my apologies if many of you would have seen many of these things earlier, but let me try to move quickly. And I always start with this what we call the 5 pillars or 5-petal diagram, which I think forms the very basis of World Bank's energy efficiency efforts around the world. That unless you have everything in place, which is bundled under policies and regulations, institutions, technical capacity, information and awareness, as well as finance, which of course is important for this particular audience today, you generally don't see energy efficiency going and moving at scale. Most of the countries, including the OECD world, where you see energy efficiency has been quite successful in the past in terms of real, energy intensity decrease over time. you see that pretty much all these 5 pillars in one form or the other have been addressed and have been built. And therefore, we have to keep this perspective in mind that finance is not the only solution here unless you have everything else. Similarly, policies and regulations themselves don't work unless you have the right institutions and the right financing mechanisms and the right technical capacity, et cetera, et cetera. So again, this is not something new. This is really trying to, again, synthesize what we have seen from countries. Now, when it comes to energy efficiency, again, I always love to show this diagram, and I like graphics than words. So pardon me that you will see a lot of pictures in my slides, is to really show why it has been a challenge in spite of the fact that energy efficiency is one of the most cost-effective mechanisms, is considered the first fuel by the International Energy Agency, is something which all of us in the audience today, as well as the speakers panel, believe that should be done first. But oftentimes we fail to recognize that it is not as easy as the technology is. It's not as easy to implement energy efficiency because of the reasons which are listed here, that they're smaller and dispersed measures. We deal with multiple stakeholders. There is, as Pierre was saying, no one-size-fits-all solution where you can take, let's say, a solar project, a PPA from one country, you can almost replicate exactly as a solar PPA in another country. But when it comes to energy efficiency, it is hardly possible to take one model from one country to implement in another country, because there's always a set of constraints which are different in each country or each jurisdiction. Similarly, of course, all this results in higher transaction costs. And ultimately, the other thing which you banker colleagues who are present today will realize that the financing is based on a virtual commodity, which is energy savings, which is an estimated number, which has to be measured. It is not an asset which you can even feel physically to be able to finance. And therefore, the asset or revenue-based financing concept does not necessarily apply to something which is being saved. But yet there are, of course, measures on the right-hand side. I try to show that there are always ways to, solutions to solve these problems. And the solutions which we try to capture, and I think Pierre showed a little bit towards this end of the presentation, was this. Before I go there, I was just going to put an example, because the World Bank right now is doing a lot of work in sustainable cooling in buildings. Now, if you just pick up this one small slice of demand-side energy efficiency, which is building space cooling, you see the diversity, the heterogeneity, the dispersed small measures, and they're so different from each other. Now, how do you actually, at different consumer categories they apply to? And so each one of these, technically, they are very straightforward solutions. But to package them into financing solutions on a large scale becomes a whole different challenge. I show this ceiling, the table fan, which is a poor man's cooling equipment, is very different when it comes to distributing those fans or having those people use these fans for cooling compared to the large chiller systems which are done in large buildings. I'm sure you are in one of those buildings right now, the hotel buildings, etc. So how do you package these large and small solutions are quite different from each other, even within one particular country. But anyway, let's go to this ladder, which I think was shown by Pierre towards his end of the presentation, that there are different financing and implementation solutions which generally move in a country from a purely private sector driven solution to a highly commercial and private sector driven solutions. ESCOs we talk about are supposed to be a very, very top of the ladder, sophisticated solution. There are many solutions in between where you can work with utilities, the electricity company, through a mechanism called utility bill financing, or you can work by setting up a revolving fund like the fund which Pierre talked about in Bulgaria. You can work with super ESCOs, which Pierre mentioned, and I'm going to explain a little bit more. You can have credit lines with the development banks and commercial banks. You can have risk-sharing guarantee mechanisms, and you go up the ladder. Basically, ultimately, you want to go up and up so that everything at the end is private sector driven and the government's role goes down slowly, because you don't want government to be the big player in this. I mean, they can trigger the market transformation, but not necessarily be the only player there, because you want this to be a purely commercial activity. So in the World Bank, of course, we have been working in many, many countries, and this is a very, I would say, selected snapshots of energy efficiency projects out of the 200 plus energy efficiency projects we have done in the last 20 years. And again, there are different types, different sizes, different kinds of interventions, different models to promote the same objective, which is having more demand-side energy efficiency. When it comes to ESCOs, again, the story is mixed. You see countries where ESCOs have really succeeded, USA, Canada, Japan, Germany, etc. China, of course, also has a certain particular type of model. But many other countries, it has been a challenge, including the countries like India, where we have been doing a lot of work, but compared to the Chinese ESCO market or the American ESCO market, the Korean ESCO market, it's still really small. In terms of what they have been able to achieve through the ESCO mechanism. One of the project examples I wanted to start with one of the projects the World Bank did is really working very, very closely with the banks to set up this ecosystem for supporting ESCOs and through performance contracting mechanisms. It was a combination of funding put through the risk-sharing facility, which is enabled as component one, along with some technical assistance, but really to bring the players together, making sure that these ESCOs, the private sector ESCOs, which was shown as the top of the, this top of the ladder rung, how do you facilitate their transactions and their scale up by bringing them together with the banks and making ESCOs, ready to be able to access the finance from the banks. Banks do want to give money, but they want to give money to viable projects. There is a lot of money floating around, which can be given. The liquidity is quite high, but ESCOs do not necessarily feel that they're ready to get that money, and the banks do not feel ready to lend money to ESCOs. So this project in India was aimed to bring them together, address the risk perceptions they had for each other. The mechanism was a relatively smaller $37 million facility set up within a bank called SIDBI, Small Industries Development Bank of India, as a partial risk sharing facility. And what it did is it worked with it has been working with many other banks. Today, it's working with 15 largest commercial banks in India to be able to enable them to lend to ESCOs by providing risk sharing and de-risking the investments by providing guarantees to these ESCO transactions. And these transactions are in municipalities, buildings, MSME sector, street lighting, whatnot. I mean, almost everything else except residential sector, I would say. So what it has been doing here is the World Bank's funding is really helping this particular facility attract the participation of all these big names, the big banks in India. The State Bank of India is one of the largest banks in the world, actually. They are participating in this, and along with many of the other names which you might be familiar with being from the banking sector in the Philippines. And these 15 banks are working to actually fund projects to ESCOs. And so far, we have been able to leverage almost 3 times by putting in the amount of money. The total expected mobilization is 135 million over the next another 3 to 4 years to go. But so far, we have done $67 million of project investments. And this is a bit dated, actually. In fact, the numbers are a little bit higher as of today, as I speak. This is from like about 4 months ago, 37 guarantees issued to many different technology projects: LED lighting, water pumping, waste heat recovery, HVAC systems, power factor correction, etc., etc. All this information is also sort of listed in this website, which also includes the templates through which the ESCOs do transactions with the banks. So banks in Philippines, for example, can really pick up these templates if they want to and refine them further and adapt them to the Philippines context. So it has the ESPC document, which is the Energy Service Performance Contract documents, the measurement and verification documents, and the guarantee documents. What kind of risk sharing is provided? So this is a fairly rich website we decided to put together so that it's available to the entire world to draw upon. When it comes to super ESCOs, I think Pierre touched upon it. I'm not going to go through the basics because super ESCOs are really a way to address some of the barriers which ESCOs face in some of the countries. We have been working with Tarsheed, the Saudi Arabian super ESCO, but there are other super ESCOs we have worked, like in Armenia. The R2E2 fund, the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Fund, works as a super ESCO. We have not worked, but we have drawn upon the experience from FedESCO in Belgium, from, of course, Etihad ESCO in the UAE, and of course, the big India super ESCO, which I'm going to talk about in the next slide. These are ways to actually address some of the barriers which ESCOs have traditionally faced as being private sector smaller entities. Super ESCO is a way to kind of provide the risk cover which banks like yourselves might face while lending to private sector. If a super ESCO comes in, some of the risk perception goes down, and therefore you're able to lend more easily to these private ESCOs when the super ESCO stands almost as a guarantor for the technical performance, but also the guarantor for financial default by the smaller ESCOs. So I think this is one of the mechanisms which have emerged to be working. There are not many of them, as Pierre was saying. Canada, of course, started one which Pierre explained, but there are countries which are hoping to do this. In Egypt, as I said, we have been talking, and we have heard in the last few days, our counterparts are talking about something similar in Egypt. I also work in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, where we have been hearing this. I also work in South Africa along with Pierre, where we have been hearing this. So I think there is a lot of interest in this model. The India Super ESCO, what it does is a value proposition by basically bringing in all these innovations together. And really, they have gotten into not just LED lights, but street lighting, building energy efficiency, agricultural energy efficiency, even electric vehicles today, smart meters. And these are being done in very, very large numbers in India. I mean, we are not talking about a few megawatts. We're talking about thousands of megawatts of energy at peak demand being reduced by actions of the super ESCO, which is essentially playing the same role which a private ESCO plays, but with a much more intention of doing a much larger scale transactions. And the strengths of the India Super ESCO program lies in their ability to do bulk procurement of the equipment, which brings down the cost, keeps the quality high. And then along with that, they do a lot of awareness and creation and simpler measurements of savings. I showed those 5 pillars. So pretty much many of those pillars, the actions under those 5 pillars are actually addressed by this one entity called EESL, Energy Efficiency Services Limited. And again, just an example of the light bulb, how they were able to bring down the cost of an LED even lower than the best quality LED in the world price in India through this bulk procurement mechanism which the Super ESCO started. You can see on the right-hand side, the prices were even comparable to the Chinese LEDs, which was supposed to be the cheapest in the world those days. So I think this is what has happened. We in the World Bank have been having a program of a $220 million loan to this particular entity. I used to manage that program up until 3 months ago when I moved to Jerusalem in Palestine. But I continue to be a part of the team, of course, and we're happy to share more information on this, which has really created a lot of buzz, a lot of savings, a lot of real results in terms of energy efficiency and GHG emissions reduction. As I said, there were Etihad, the Saudi Arabian Super ESCO was designed by the World Bank. And again, this is the snapshot of the Saudi Super ESCO called Tarsheed. We have many building blocks of this setting of the super ESCO, which are mentioned here, and the links there actually take you to those numbers and those documents which explain how the Saudi Super ESCO was set up. There was no financial involvement in Saudi Super ESCO by the World Bank. We were technical advisors. We were providing technical assistance to the government of Saudi Arabia and to the Saudi Energy Efficiency Center to be able to develop this design, and which was finally funded by the government of Saudi Arabia in 2017 by putting in roughly $500 to $550 million as a seed capital. And Saudi program today is very successful. 9,000 public buildings have been addressed by private ESCOs, which are supported by the Saudi Super ESCO, including these large buildings in Riyadh. These are real ESCO projects going on. They have saved 5 terawatt hours of electricity in the first 5 years of operation. This is a phenomenal achievement for any country for energy efficiency, and a country which is also, as you know, an oil producer. So they work with buildings, public facilities largely. They're also moving into private buildings, but basically everything is done by private ESCO companies with the support from Tasheed as a super ESCO. Lessons learned are pretty much the same, which Pierre was explaining. You need a good policy and ecosystem support to be able to do that. Philippines already has that. Philippines has had the law. Philippines has had the program for energy efficiency. So I think you are, in terms of readiness, quite ready. Potential for ESCO model can be strengthened by standardizing documents, because bankers like standardized documents. They don't like surprises. The more you have standardized, which are risks which have addressed the risks, it's easier to push these market mechanisms, get more money from the banks. Otherwise, it takes more time, the more transaction costs, which stops many of the small players to be able to enter the market. And also bankers don't want to spend too much time on giving out loans. They would rather use a standard template and feel comfortable before they give out money. Shared savings and guaranteed savings must have been talked about in the earlier sessions. I didn't go to the basics, but shared savings with the ESCO as the borrower is becoming more and more popular, which is the right way to go, because ultimately you want to de-link the investment from the consumer or the end user or the building owner or the factory owner, but actually put that on the ESCO so that the ESCO can come in, borrow, do the work, results, create the results, get paid, and get out of the deal and let the consumer enjoy. That's a shared savings mechanism which is emerging. Technical assistance efforts are important. So if there are other multilateral development banks or USAID and other colleagues who are connected, my urge is always that keep providing technical assistance, because you will need to develop the ecosystem and the templates and the tools, which takes time, which takes effort, which takes money. Just throwing in cheap concessional finance doesn't do the work. What we have seen in 20, 30 other countries where the World Bank has done this, we always have to have technical assistance to provide the ecosystem support. And public sector institutions like EESL in India and Tasheed in Saudi Arabia could be one of the ways to unlock the private sector ESCO market, which has, as I was saying, suffered except for a few countries. And I'm going to stop here by showing this last slide, which I'm saying that opportunities to scale up EE is not just what we used to think 20 years ago. The whole sector is going through a major disruption, and you have consumers who are becoming prosumers. Buildings are producing electricity and selling to the utility. Electric vehicles are being connected. There's a lot of digital technologies floating around. Everything can be done on smartphones. So all this combination actually makes energy efficiency much more exciting and interesting in the next 20 years compared to what we have done in the last 20 years. So it's no more just putting LED light bulbs or street lights, but you can talk about smart street lights and smart buildings and smart grids all integrated together. So I think energy efficiency players and energy efficiency projects of the future will be much more innovative than what we have seen in the past. So the bankers who are sitting in the room have to think about this vision. They have to prepare themselves to get these very, very innovative proposals from many of these ESCOs in the future. Thank you very much, Mark and team, and good to see Pierre, of course, but also Alex, I heard, is in the room. So these are my old friends and colleagues and experts with whom I've learned a lot in the past. So I really appreciate the opportunity. And again, I'm going to stick around for next maybe half an hour at the most. Then I have to get ready for the meetings for this morning in Cairo. But great to be here. And again, thanks for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashok. I want a show of hands from the room. Who wishes they could be that inspiring at 5 a.m.? Amazing, Ashok. Your enthusiasm and your experience comes through loud and clear, and we really, really appreciate all your inputs and some great examples of having impact. I think what we can see here is that these ideas are not, they might be new to the Philippines, but they're not new. They're opportunities that others are already taking. And you see from the examples in Saudi Arabia, really big impacts can be made in really short time. Talking about this ESCO configuration, talking about how we can scale up. So now we are moving, well, before I move on, I think it's probably important to give a minute just for anybody to ask any questions or clarifications of what Ashok has said. Again, I think it's probably, a crime, Ashok, to ask you to present what you know on this topic in 10 to 15 minutes. You could tell us, we could benefit from what you're saying for much, much longer. But does anybody have any quick questions that they immediately have in their mind from what Ashok was presenting? Okay, well, there may be questions that come later and that people will connect with you on. Ashok, I really appreciate your inputs. We will keep moving. We have about 40 minutes until the lunch break. How is everybody going? Still awake and alert? That's great. We're now moving from the really great information that we've heard from both Pierre and Ashok, real leaders in this area, about some of the models that can work. The question we're moving to now and for the rest of the afternoon is which of these models could work here in the Philippines? And starting to think about what is it that you face in your work that is stopping you from taking those steps or pushing forward some of those models and ideas within your organizations. So this next 40 minutes, we want to start talking about the building blocks of what would be needed. What are the different pieces of the puzzle? And I think you'll start hearing the same things. Pierre said it in one way, Ashok said it in a different way. I'm going to talk in a little minute and tell you another way. All of them the same kind of ideas about moving up this ladder or the different options that are available, and also the need for not just one measure, but a range of supporting measures that brings different parts of the equation together. Pierre said that you need to work on both sides. It's no use having projects without any finance. It's no use having finance without any projects. So we need to work on the demand and the supply. So building that and supporting that are some of these other mechanisms that we can consider. The bottom of the ladder is talking about grant financing and support from governments and so on, concessional financing. I'm really pleased to welcome now to the stage David Morgado, who's he's Senior Energy Specialist with the Asian Development Bank. So another banker, another financier. David has a great history in this area. He's worked for AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank in Beijing, looking at energy sector issues. He's also worked for the IEA in the Energy Efficiency and Emerging Economies Program. And before that, back in this region with IEC, I think. So he has quite a long history with energy efficiency and quite a lot to say on this topic from the point of view of development finance, concessional finance. So I think we're now moving into this section of what is it that can help the sector here. In the afternoon, we're going to talk more about what solutions we could potentially start to progress. I'll also ask shortly, or I haven't forgotten, that we need to flash up that QR code for the survey. So I'll be asking all of you, if you haven't done it already, there it is, if you want to take another opportunity. By lunch in the afternoon, I want to share what you've said and what you've been saying about the issues that you're facing. So we can use that for a discussion starter in the afternoon. I'll just give it one more second. If you haven't managed to scan that already, we'll put it back in the lunch break as well. David, with that, I'll introduce you and please share us your perspectives, I guess your experience on this question about concessional finance for energy efficiency. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark, and it's great to see Ashok as well. I haven't seen him in a while. hopefully we can meet in person very soon. So firstly, I'd like to thank the Energy Transition Partnership and the Bankers Association for their invitation to be here today. It's always a pleasure to be able to talk about an important topic that I'm very passionate about, and that's energy efficiency. And as Mark highlighted, something I've been working for some time. I'd like to highlight that today, as many of you know, we're facing three crises: a climate crisis, an energy, and a health crisis. And by investing in energy efficiency, we can help address all of these three in one go. However, we need to make sure we have the right regulation and incentives, and something that we've been hearing a lot today, combined with consumer awareness to create an enabling environment for energy efficiency market to grow. And again, something Ashok talked about, the 5 petals. At the Asian Development Bank, we are committed to becoming the climate finance bank for Asia and the Pacific. Therefore, we've increased our ambition for level of climate financing to $100 billion cumulatively from 2019 to 2030. So that's very ambitious from the bank, and we're working to be able to achieve those targets. In addition, last year, the ADB launched its new energy policy, which has energy efficiency very much at its core. We believe that accelerating progress on energy efficiency gains across the region could contribute to the agendas of energy security, which is now on top of the agenda, and energy access, while also producing cost and environmental benefits. And as we heard from the Central Bank of Philippines, that's something increasingly important for banks. ADB's energy policy aims to support our developing member countries, including Philippines, in several areas of energy efficiency. That includes promoting clean and efficient cooling solutions, which we heard a lot about today, supply and demand side energy efficiency, promoting energy efficiency policies and regulations across all sectors, including building energy codes, as we heard, again, very important, and also providing innovative financing instruments and mobilizing private sector resources. And that's the reason why we're here today. So let me focus a bit on the Philippines. The Philippines Energy Efficiency Conservation Act, approved in 2019, has been a major step forward, and I congratulate all of those involved in this effort, and also the other policies that we heard today. The Act can deliver a range of benefits in terms of energy savings, greenhouse gas emissions avoidance, job creation, which is so important today, and reduce stress on supply, as well as constraints on electricity transmission and distribution. So we heard a bit about that as well today, and what's happening here with a lot of power shortages. In support of the Philippines Energy Efficiency Conservation Act, I'd like to outline 2 ways ADB can deploy concessional finance to promote energy efficiency investments in the country. First, we can provide technical support and financial assistance to help demonstrate the benefits and viability of energy efficiency investments. And we heard from Sirpa and Thomas about demonstration projects, and we've done just that. So from 2019 to 2014, ADB supported the Department of Energy here in the Philippines to implement the Philippines Energy Efficiency Project, many of you might know, which comprised of a $30 million loan with a $1.5 million grant. So the project retrofitted about 150 government buildings, around 1,500 streetlights with LED streetlights, several traffic intersections with energy efficient lighting systems. We distributed an amazing amount of compact fluorescent lamps, about 8.6 million nationwide. We established a lamp waste management facility to properly dispose the 4.4 million incandescent bulbs, and we enhanced the testing facilities for energy efficiency in the Department of Energy, which is still running today. So the Philippine Energy Efficiency Project resulted in an estimated energy savings of about 360 gigawatt hours per year, and deferral of an investment of 230 megawatts of power generation. So if I link the numbers correctly, I think that's enough to offset the Ayala Land Corporation. And this was just a demonstration. You might call it a large-scale pilot demonstration. And it showed the value that ADB can add and provide in terms of covering technical assistance and also concessional finance. With the current 3 crises, it's the ideal time to consider a second phase and look at a nationwide energy efficiency program, including for all public buildings. And we can extend it, as many of you talked about, combining it with rooftop solar, as well as electric vehicles and the respective charging infrastructure. We must keep in mind that energy efficiency policies combined with bulk public procurement, as Ashok mentioned, can help energy efficiency market grow considerably and deliver low-cost energy efficient technologies. We've seen this approach being successfully applied in India, where we also have been working with the government and provided a $200 million loan and a $13 million grant to the government through a government-owned energy service company, ESL, as well. Under the India Energy Efficiency Project, we established an energy efficiency revolving fund to finance several millions of LED street lights and LED bulbs under bulk procurement. The project also piloted new energy efficient technologies to showcase them to the government, and including electric vehicles and charging stations. Following its success, we further extended this project to another $200 million, and now covering energy efficient pumps for agricultural sector, which I think could be of interest here to the Philippines, and smart metering as well. Second, we can use concessional finance to help develop bankable investments and attract private financing. So again, something we touched upon today. ADB has been involved in developing regional and national green financing platforms to support the scale up and mobilize financing for green investments. We have the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility, which works across all ASEAN countries, and the SDG Indonesia One Green Finance Facility, which works at national level in Indonesia. And both are examples of platforms to leverage concessional funds and catalyze public and private financing. In the Philippines, the Development Bank of the Philippines and other financial institutions can play a catalytic role in channeling funds from international finance markets to local projects. These institutions can help aggregate fragmented project pipelines to achieve the scale that is needed to attract private investors. And we've been closely working with the Development Bank in the Philippines looking at this here. For example, with the support of these financial institutions, it'll be possible to tap into energy efficiency lending potential for small and medium enterprises, which is estimated around 132 billion pesos by 2030. The overall energy efficiency lending potential by 2030 here in the country is estimated at around 320 billion pesos, covering both private and public sector. So there's a huge opportunity that we can tap into. ADB can also help access and mobilize co-financing from a range of partners, including multilateral funds, such as the Climate Investment Funds, Green Climate Fund, and these can help commercial and national development banks to reduce on lending prices to customers and reduce project risks. I hope this gives you a glimpse of what ADB can offer and our extensive experience in energy efficiency in the Philippines as well as other countries. I look forward to the discussions today and working with many of you here to accelerate investment in energy efficiency in both public and private sectors in the Philippines. So thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you, David, and for running through the commitments, which are wide and varied, of ADB towards this sector and towards supporting the financial sector here in terms of bolstering your own efforts. So that's something for you all to think about in terms of how can you create these steps forward from where we are now, and how can we actually access and support each other and using ADB's significant, substantial sort of focus on this area as well. Are there any questions for David? All of you in the audience will not be able to stay quiet for much longer. In the afternoon, we have a big opportunity for you to speak, both with each other and speak up to us, because we need to hear what you think about all of this. We need to hear what reaction you have, or whether there's anything that you're wondering. Of course, you can utilize the lunch break and spend some time to meet each other then. But if anyone has anything they're wondering, please do speak up. I have a question from our co-hosts.
Okay, thank you. And thank you so much for that ADB presentation. My question actually goes to Ashok. I wonder if he's still online. Ashok?
Yeah, I'm still around.
Right. Yeah, because you said that in 2018, the Filipino team came to see you in DC. I just wonder, now that we've heard from ADB, what advice did you give that team regarding the next steps, how to sort of capture the early wins and the quick wins, and what next, you know, and also with respect to the programs that you have been putting in place in elsewhere in the world, especially the India experience, I think is very relevant and interesting for Southeast Asian application. But what was the advice that you then, maybe that provides us a nice starting point for our discussion. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that's a very good question. And absolutely what we did is really we're trying to convince, and this was, I have to go back and look at my notes, but it was primarily a government delegation. Yeah. It wasn't, I don't recall there were any ESCOs or any private sector or any bankers in that delegation. It was primarily a government delegation. So the advice was more in terms of what the government should do and should not do in terms of energy efficiency, because at the end of the day, we believe that much of this investments has to come from private sector. What the government should do is provide regulatory and policy certainty, provide the assurance that there are commitments and targets in energy efficiency, provide the policy and regulatory environment, which is sometimes through a law, sometimes through a regulation, building codes, minimum energy performance standards, etc. And then really let the private sector do its job. And so much of that session with the delegation was to share exactly these experiences, that how do you take, as you said, the India model and try to adapt it to the Philippines? Where should, what is missing? What are the building blocks already in place, and what are the actions which still needs to be taken to enable the ESCO market to thrive, for instance, in the Philippines? So that is the kind of advice we were giving. And it was more of a knowledge sharing session where we wanted to show some of these examples. In fact, we also talked about the Bulgaria example, which Pierre talked about, the Armenia Energy Efficiency Renewable Energy Fund we talked about. We talked basically about these practical, result-oriented, evidence-based experiences, which would then convince the government to actually look at this as real practical mechanisms and not as theory. Because oftentimes energy efficiency is a concept which is very difficult to understand for many who haven't worked in this area, because of the very fact that it's not like asset-based financing as we see in a normal context. So that was the I would say the context. I'm happy to actually put some of you in touch with our World Bank Manila colleagues, Philippines colleagues. I don't know whether they're attending this event or not. I have a very good colleague who is based out of the World Bank office in the Philippines, in Manila, who actually is an energy efficiency professional as well, who has done this in other countries. And I don't know, Feng, whether he's available in the room or not, but I can definitely put Mark and whoever is in the room interested in touch with those colleagues in the Philippines office, who will be able to, help or at least have a dialogue with many of you who are interested in taking that 2018 discussion forward.
Thanks, Ashok. That's really helpful, and we can be in touch about that and keeping things moving in that discussion.
Yeah.
David, I wonder, since you're also involved in this, whether you have any comment around that same issue.
So Ashok, I think that was the work you did on the Philippines energy efficiency public buildings, which is a report that's, I think, publicly available, which is very good too. So you can see all the different structures.
That report is from 2017, which was done by this team, which is working in the Philippines. My work in the Philippines was when I was with the Asian Development Bank, which was almost 17 years ago. I haven't done work myself in the Philippines since my ADB days. So I have other colleagues who are working on that. And the 2017 report is indeed a public report. You're absolutely right, David. And nice to see you, David, by the way.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, just to mention that report from the World Bank looked at public buildings, and it has the different structures of how the financing could be done, public, private, super ESCO approach, which I really recommend, and it's a really good publication. And just to say again, the Asian Development Bank is here available to support you and continue to support the Development Bank of Philippines and others to build the capacity to help you understand these market and what are the opportunities, because the studies are out there. Alex has done them already, also publicly available. So anybody interested to looking at the scale of opportunity of energy efficiency in the Philippines market and sort of the structures that we have in mind. We've been looking at insurance solutions, looking at de-risking of projects. And nowadays it's so important to look at de-risking, not only from the ESCO side perspective, ensure that those savings can be achieved, but also ensure that the client can make the payments in the end. And it's very risky for everybody. But there are structures that to overcome those challenges, and it's possible. And again, we can support that. We can bring in concessional finance to make it even more attractive for customers in this current situation.
Great. Thank you, David. And we will come back to this question of de-risking. Risk is something that banks like to think about a lot. And so, we'll look at that from a couple of perspectives in terms of what can be done to unlock financing, thinking about risk and how we reduce actual or perceived risk. So I think that's very important. We're going to have to move on. Thank you very much, David, for the presentation. We're almost at lunch. We have one more important speaker to hear from, and then I'll try to wrap things up and add a couple of pieces of my own. But we're going to try and keep it real now in terms of what's happening in the Philippines around successful financing. I'm very pleased we have NG to speak. So Chini Defensor is the VP of Business Development, I think, for NG. She's going to talk to us about some of the successful financing that has been done in the Philippines, and we'll use that as a template to kind of think about some of these things in practice. So please go ahead, Chini. Thanks. The floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I have the distinction of being the last speaker separating you before your lunch. So I would like to keep it short and brief. And first of all, thank you, Mark, for inviting NG to speak here today. It is a great honor to be here among all of these esteemed speakers and guests. So I think if we could have the presentation just shown, we'll keep this quite succinct. So I think we will be kind of switching the gears a little bit with my presentation. I'll be speaking from the point of view of a developer and ESCO. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what we've been able to successfully develop, as Mark mentioned, but also some of the pain points which I think would be important for this conversation to go forward on how can we start to accelerate energy efficiency projects. So hopefully this is something that we can talk a little further on.
I'm sorry, I have the slides. I'm trying to share them to the slide sharers. Sorry about that. And my computer has frozen.
All right, no worries.
Okay, I think if you can continue, that would be great. Just because
sure.
I
All
can't.
right, let's just keep things moving. First, let me introduce myself. As mentioned, I'm with NG, and just to contextualize a little bit, I think some of you may be familiar with who NG is. We are a French multinational, but in particular, we do have several business units, and the one which is present here in the Philippines is our Energy Solutions Group. And the way that that differs from our other groups is we have also a renewables team, which is focused on the large scale development This would be the large scale solar farms, wind farms, etc. So our group is focused primarily on the corporate business to business kind of transactions. So this is the one that is present here in the Philippines. And if we might move on to the next slide. Okay, so we are a solutions integrator. And what we mean by that is that NG, we do not manufacture or promote a particular brand of equipment or solution, but we are here to integrate and really to capitalize on our technical and financial strength to help our customers reduce their energy consumption and most especially their CO2 footprint. We are really here to build today the low carbon energy systems of tomorrow. And so we are here, I think, as somebody who can help our clients to adopt these greener and more sustainable energy solutions. And we'll have a bit of a deeper dive into that later on. Okay, next slide, please. Right. Within APAC, our headquarters is in Singapore. We also have a presence in Malaysia and of course here in the Philippines. And we have about 2,000 employees here in the Asia Pacific region. We are the largest power producer in Singapore with 3.3 gigawatts of capacity. And all of our work really revolves around two key factors. One is that we would like to be able to consume less energy. And there's been a lot of discussion around that today. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the solutions that we employ for this. And then second, cleaner energy. So these are our green and sustainable energy solutions. And we do this in three key areas of focus, which is in the industrials, in real estate, and in data centers. So these are done via partnerships. Some of you may be aware that we have several joint ventures with Philinvest. So we do bank on a local partner with a lot of regional and geographical strength here in the Philippines, and also direct customer relationships. Next slide, please. All right, so what is it specifically that we do and what has been the success around some of the energy solutions that we've put in place? So first, with rooftop solar energy, with rooftop solar, we've been able to energize as of December of 2021, a 2.8 megawatt peak solar rooftop system on Festival Mall in Alabang. So that was something that was undertaken with our partner Philinvest through our joint venture. So we have a JV that has been set up for RE, specifically here in the Philippines. As you may be aware, there is a cap on foreign ownership. So leveraging these local partnerships is very important for us. And it is also at this level, of course, that we would obtain financing for this kind of project. The next one is what we call utility as a service. And these are our energy efficient solutions. So I think quite a lot of speakers already have talked about chilled water systems. And of course, that is one of the main solutions where we try to make the air conditioning more efficient, and where running the same kind of chilled water system would consume 20 to 30% less energy with the proper technological interventions. But aside from this, there are also other utilities which can be made more energy efficient. So there are solutions for compressed air, for glycol, for example, for manufacturing facilities. And these are some of the other utility as a service solutions that we have in place. And here at NG, the way that we also like to be able to help our clients adopt this in a easier fashion is for us to be able to help them with the financing. So our solutions are done as BOOTs. It's always at a zero upfront cost, long-term contracts, in order for them also to be able to realize savings on their end. The next one is our district cooling system. So this is somewhat like the chilled water plants that were talked about earlier, but on a larger scale. So here in the Philippines, we have our North Gate. If you're familiar with that, it is a complex of office buildings in Alabang. And we've connected 16 buildings to our DCS. And basically, because it is centralized, it helps us to be able to deliver chilled water, which goes into their air conditioning solutions in a more efficient way. And we're able to now service these 16 buildings and to be able to deliver lower electricity costs as well to their own locators and BPOs and office buildings within that area of Alabang. So this is undertaken through our JV as well. We have another JV with Philinvest called PDDC, Philippine DCS Development Corporation. And that is the entity which undertook our Northgate DCS system. We also have integrated facilities management, and this is the group that supports our other projects. We do facilities management for Clark and Mactan Airport. We also provide support for our DCS and other energy efficiency projects. But what I would like to highlight now is the Green Data Center, because this is, I think, one of the up and coming energy efficiency spaces that we need to look out for. In the pandemic, the Philippine e-commerce, and I'm sure a lot of you are also familiar with the rise in the use of e-wallets and online transactions, which tripled during the pandemic. And the Philippines is currently the fourth fastest growing in terms of data usage. So our country has now become one of the hotspots in terms of developing data centers. And you're starting to see all the telcos start to look into the development of these infrastructure needs. So because it is very energy intensive, there is a need for us as well to design and be very deliberate in the way that we roll out data centers. So there is more efficient use of water, and then of course the design of the system itself for the cooling requirements to be as energy efficient as possible. You can also integrate the use of solar rooftop directly into the green data center itself. So what we'd like to be able to do is to merge and to marry all of our different green energy solutions to be able to reduce the carbon footprint of a data center, which is something that is very much needed and needs to be accelerated in terms of development here in the Philippines. For the other energy solutions, green mobility and microgrid, we are familiar with electric vehicles and also with microgrid solutions that contain battery energy storage systems. These are available in Singapore, but here in the Philippines, NG hasn't yet invested in these kind of projects here. So of course, it's something that we continue to take a look at. And as I think the regulatory developments fall into place, it would, of course, be something else that we would like to be able to see and to accelerate as we go into it. Finally, I'd like to just touch on digital solutions, because automation for us is one of the key enablers for energy efficiency. For us to be able to be more efficient and to make the adjustments in the operations and maintenance of all of our energy systems, visibility is such an important factor because we can't correct what we are unaware of. So with digital solutions, with Smart O&M, which is an automation of the operations and maintenance of various equipment and energy efficiency equipment, we're now able to track and monitor and see what is the energy consumption, whether there are actual preventive maintenance that would be required for us to be able to meet our guarantees to the client, and also for our own internal hurdle rates and to maintain a certain level of efficient operations. All right, so that's just the entire universe from our perspective at NG, where you can see what are the different solutions in energy efficiency. So I'd like to just focus on the last slide, since we were talking about how do we unlock or how do we enable energy efficient financing, and basically talk through some of the pain points. So yes, we've had successes, but there have also been some learnings, and I think some ways that we can better enable energy efficiency here in the Philippines. So I'll just talk through it based on the experience that we've had thus far. And also, I would also like to note that based on what the previous speakers have said, I'm glad to see that some of these are already being addressed and that there are already steps to move forward on some of these items. So the first one is the extensive due diligence and reporting process. For energy efficiency, usually there's a very long process of due diligence and documents, which fortunately for NG, I think we have the capability because we are a global firm, but there are smaller ESCOs as well, which would like to be able to avail of financing, and this can be burdensome for some which are smaller and don't have the necessary support in place. The second one is that energy efficiency financing, this is a little bit related to the first point, is they require KPI setting and validation. So once financing is obtained, once we've gone through that initial hurdle of, okay, we've done the due diligence, we've been able to secure financing, now we need to be able to commit to certain KPIs during the actual implementation of the project. And in the same way, some of the ESCOs may not also be set up to be able to have all of the documentation and reportorial duties that would come with these financing obligations. So that could be time consuming and quite onerous as well for the ESCOs or developers. The third one is that, especially for, I think, some of the smaller projects, it is difficult to secure competitive rates and the lower spread for those that aren't quite as established. There are startup players, and this even includes as well for local SPVs that have been set up by foreign companies, which may not have the balance sheet to be able to fully get the best interest rates for a loan. And in this case, it's quite difficult because a lot of the energy efficiency projects or these green energy projects may not necessarily be very high capex. So for example, we have some automation projects where you look at digitalization, you capitalize on that to be able to operate something more efficiently. Or you look at a solar rooftop project, which is 1 megawatt. And typically these are in the range of $1 million or below. So it's not that sizable, which makes it now more difficult for the ESCOs to be able to get very preferential types of interest rates or sustainable loans on their end. The other one would be the high capex requirements, which is tied into the previous point that was made. I'll just use as an example. In 2013, we were able to partner with ADB on a multi-currency loan. This was a $20 million loan back when we were known as COFALI. And it was for energy efficiency projects in Thailand, Malaysia, and the Philippines. So again, NG has been quite well placed in order to be able to avail of these kinds of financing solutions because we do have a presence in other countries and are able to bundle these projects together. In particular, the Philippines allocated $3 million for retrofitting and for the establishment of energy efficient chilled water systems. But for other ESCOs, if we're looking at enabling others which may not have quite as big of a footprint, the bundling of these projects can be quite challenging. We also look at the development timelines to put projects in place, and typically you don't have a very neat bundling of projects wherein you can avail of something and have a one-time investment for all of the projects to be rolled out simultaneously. That is something that is quite rare, to have a portfolio that would neatly fall into a short development timeline. Sometimes projects can take 2-3 years to develop and negotiate and to come to an agreement with a client. So that's one of the challenges as well that we see as a developer. And then finally, terms and conditions as well can impose additional obligations, not just on the ESCO or developer, but also on the client or owner of the premises. Because in this case, the ESCO is coming in not as the owner of the premises, but as the owner of the asset. So if you are coming in the BOOT kind of arrangement, you own the asset, you own the rooftop solar solution, you own the chiller or the cooling towers, for example. And this is something that would remain in the balance sheet of the ESCO. But of course, you also have obligations to the owner of the premises. And typically, the financing requirements would also have some of these back-to-back terms and conditions and requirements, which could make it difficult as well in the entire negotiation process with the owner of the premises, especially, of course, if they're risk averse or they also want to be able to enter into a relatively simple kind of solution. So
Ms.
I-
Chinny, we have to wrap up in about 1
Yes.
minute.
Okay, so well, these are just, I think, some of the challenges that we've seen, but it is very heartening to see and hear from the speakers earlier that there are strides that are being taken to actually address these things. So we are very confident that this is just the start of something that would continue to accelerate the adoption of energy efficiency. And yeah, we look forward to seeing how the Philippines continues to grow and to be able to further mitigate the effects of climate change through energy efficiency projects. So just on a very final note, we at NG, we commit to net zero by 2045, and we look forward to working with all of you to help achieve this. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Chinny. Thanks for sharing your perspectives and those of NG. We can see there is expertise in the country to start working on these programs, thinking about how you might get involved with, if you're thinking about your own lending from your own institutions, the organizations that you can work with, partner with, start to develop thinking and programs on. So thank you very much. We don't have much time for questions, unfortunately, but we are about to go to the lunch break. We have 2 more things to do. One, I want to try and summarize very quickly what some of the things you've heard this morning and add 1 thing of my own. And also we need to come together for a group photo and then we can eat. So let me just go straight then to what I was going to say by way of trying to summarize. I mean, I think we've covered an enormous amount of ground this morning, and thank you for your continued attention in all of that. We've talked about what's happening in the Philippines right now. You know, I think there's a mood for change, but still we don't know how to progress. Really, we're still at the starting gate in terms of thinking how we can really scale up and accelerate on finance. But there are options out there, international models that have worked well. There's concessional finance, as we've heard, which is a possibility to kickstart things. And then we need to think about what are the other barriers that you have internally. I don't know if you can share my slides at the other end. Special thanks to our technical support in San Francisco, by the way, who's doing a great job of keeping things together. But I guess I just want to share a couple of things from my side. You've kind of got the idea that I've been involved with some of these energy efficiency practitioners for a while, which I have. I'm actually involved with a company called Asia Clean Energy Partners, and we help around the region looking at building the blocks of sort of knowledge and insights on energy efficiency and bringing people together around these topics. And so we've learned a lot about some of these things along the way. I also have a couple of connections here in that I was involved in the early draft of the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Roadmap, which was adopted in 2017, the precursor to the bill, and have been involved in other capacities as well, including in Denmark as the head of the Copenhagen Center on Energy Efficiency, which was the Sustainable Energy for All global hub of energy efficiency. So I've had some exposure to all these things. We can skip past the first few slides. I just want to cut to the chase. Yep, we can skip. That's just a bit of background on us that you can get with these slides later. Go back 1, please. Back 1 from there. Okay, perfect. So this is my summary diagram, similar to what Ashok showed you, of the 5 different petals, the things that are needed to be in place, the building blocks, what needs to be there. And I like to talk about it in terms of push measures. This is the regulation and requirements and minimum standards for buildings and mandated audits of facilities to make sure that we know what savings opportunities there are. This helps on the push side, but then we also need the pull side. The pull side here, which is incentives for people to act, and those need to be in place as well. Availability of concessional finance, availability of attractive development terms. right? And understanding around those things. And then what I call market lift measures. This is the understanding and awareness and recognition that these things are important. And then you have these in-between sort of measures, which we've also talked about. All of this has been talked about today already. Somewhere between a regulation and information is a target and a commitment. So the fact that the government has committed through DOE to take bold steps in this area, it's very important. It's not a hard regulation, but it sends a very important information signal to raise awareness. On the other side, we have active market facilitation, and this is more the area where we're in. Somewhere between incentives and information, it's where we actually help people to take action, looking at things like supporting the ESCO sector, supporting banks to work with the ESCO sector, understanding and developing projects, right? And then there's also an area we haven't talked much about today, down here between regulation and incentive, which is energy pricing, and the role of utilities like Meralco and the many others in the Philippines to actually come in here and reinforce and support on the regulation that's there, and potentially provide incentives also, because their incentives also need to line up behind this for the whole thing to work. Can you go to the next slide, please? Again, this was another thing implicit in what everyone has been saying today. It's not just one measure and it's not just one audience. We have to get everybody in this system working and pulling together. So we have financiers, that's you guys at the bottom left, ESCOs and market intermediaries at the bottom right, governments, but also energy users. We need actually everybody understanding this opportunity and doing their part, not just on the supply side, not just on the demand side. And some of the things that need to be done, we've talked about today. Some of these actions are about helping you guys to understand risk and maybe take energy efficiency risk, because you've heard people say asset-based financing is really most of what's happening, and it's a limitation to have that asset-based financing as the only energy efficiency financing. ESCOs don't have balance sheets that can support that level of financing. And in the end, development finance is not sufficient to create the scale of portfolios we're talking about. So we need to find a way to take that lending on the basis of energy efficiency performance. And we need energy users and project companies like ENGIE, for example, to be good at developing projects that can be understood and accepted by banks. So we need to do this work on all sides. Okay, this is the basis of our discussion this afternoon. Do you want to move on to the next slide, please? Yeah, and I think this has all been said in different ways. I'm not going to spend more time on it. Knowing what technologies is important. ESCOs can be very important to this. Standardized contracting, so understanding the legal basis that you're engaging with ESCOs, and even comparing between ESCOs. It's important because it's about sharing risk. The bank takes some risk, the ESCO takes some risk, the customer takes some risk. How much risk depends on the contracts. So if we can have some consistency in that, it can be very helpful. As we've said, and procurement also, multi-year contracts, this has come up. Signing and agreeing with someone for many years can be a challenge for many procurement systems. Government needs to procure equipment and put it in and get the least cost. They don't need to sign a 5-year contract with somebody to provide energy as a service. This is complicated, right? So this is part of the issue, working on procurement and contracting. As we've said, off-balance sheet lending is going to be important. Reliance on project cash flow and vehicles that can capture and securitize that cash flow, right? Not just asset-backed or guarantee-backed. So this is important. And then other things have been mentioned as well. Guarantees, supporting banks with guarantees that can be from development funders or other donors, energy savings insurance, to provide that sense of de-risking. So on that last point about de-risking, I know it's lunchtime. I have one more thing to tell you. Another hat that I have in all of this is something that I do that others in the call also are involved in, and many people within the ESCO sector know very well. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I'm the chair of something called the Efficiency Valuation Organization, or EVO. And EVO is the owner for 25 years, the developer and the owner of something called the International Performance Measurement and Verification Protocol. It's a big mouthful. Another acronym, IPMVP, right? But what EVO does is helps to train people in this protocol to understand how you can measure energy efficiency performance of projects. This is what the protocol does. Next slide, please. So I don't want to spend much time on this, but I want you to know that there's a tool available and widely available to understand energy efficiency performance and therefore energy efficiency performance risk. So as this says, it's been around for 20 years. It's about measuring and verifying energy efficiency so you can have confidence. And so that ESCOs can have confidence, they can be held accountable. So financiers can have confidence that energy savings are being achieved. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's too much information on all this, and I think we're all hungry. I'm not going to go through it in any much detail, but the IP MVP has been established since more than 25 years, and it's been used and rolled out among a wide range of countries. I think we have 10 languages and about 35 countries where trainees have been trained. And so this gives an opportunity to specify that you would like to have professionals actually giving you some assurance on the energy savings of projects. You can specify that in contracting. And indeed, in the Philippines, the requirements that were put in place for the Government Energy Management Program recently by the Inter-Department Management Committee specifies that projects should be using this protocol. In fact, it's behind most of the protocols that you see around the world. There's others looking to do this, for example, called the Investor Confidence Project, other projects which are trying to give more confidence. All of them use IPMVP. It's the gold standard of understanding performance from projects. Do you want to move ahead? Next slide, please. Yeah, so there's a very comprehensive program that's available to anybody wishing to look at becoming a practitioner in energy efficiency savings. And that's something that we roll out around the world. Next slide, please. Okay, these are the certification programs that we offer. Next slide, please. I just want to talk briefly that we also have a training program for banks. And this is a training program called the International Energy Efficiency Financing Protocol. So this is a program that takes risk and credit officers through the issues related to energy efficiency performance. And it allows for the assessment of project proposals. It allows for an understanding of the kinds of things that you would need to know to be able to take energy efficiency performance risk. This is a program that's been rolled out successfully in a number of countries for banks. I don't want to go too much more detail on it. We can talk more in the break, and I know we're over time. So let's move ahead. Next slide, please. Yeah, okay, well, let's go again. Next. Next, yeah, you can read about this later when we send all the slides. I want to finish here. So the building blocks of energy efficiency finance we've been talking about today. I just wanted to put this up because it's very similar to what Ashok was saying about the financing ladder, and Pierre had something similar as well. These are the sorts of measures that we can tackle. We've talked about many of them today. This is from the Philippine Sustainable Finance Roadmap that was issued and that Assistant Governor Javier referred to. And also I think Vice President Cruz referred to the Sustainable Finance Roadmap and Framework. So the sorts of things that can be done in the short term, medium term, long term, this is already there as supportive material reinforced today by BSP, reinforced today by DBP, that we can start thinking about these things. So I want to leave you with that now as we go into the lunch break, to think about what is it that we need in the Philippines? What is it of these things could we progress? Could we do this in the short term? Should we be aiming in the medium term for something more? You know, we talked about technology, knowing the technologies that are out there and are important, knowing, knowing how to progress with the ESCO models towards even a super ESCO to get bigger projects that are easier to manage by banks. So all of these questions should be in our mind as we head into this, this break and then into the afternoon when we're going to ask you how we can go ahead from here. So I moved through that very quickly because I know we're over time, but I would like to leave you with that thought in your mind so that you can come to the afternoon ready to contribute. We'll definitely be giving you much more chance to talk and hear your views. So with that, I think we should invite everyone. Oh, we should finish the morning session right there. And we should, with that, bring everybody to the stage so we can have a group photo before we enjoy our lunch. Thanks all for your attention this morning. So please come up as quickly as possible, then we can relax and take a break and enjoy some lunch. So our photographer will guide us. Do we want to be here and here? Okay, please come forward. Okay. The rain's still coming. Pass on. If we could all come quickly to the front, and then we will have plenty of time to chat and to take our lunch. Thanks. Let's get this done as quickly as possible. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We'll start this afternoon session, which will be very different to this morning. We have sunlight, where the sun's shining on us. Well, not quite, not in August in Manila, but yeah, not quite. But anyway, we've got a new bright outlook. We've talked a lot this morning, and I hope your brain is not overloaded with all the things we discussed, looking at it from this same question of energy efficiency finance from so many different perspectives. We heard from DOE on the support that they're interested in giving, and also BSP looking at regulation of the industry. The mood is good. I think the mood is strong for activity and uptake on energy efficiency. We heard from industry and people trying to do these kinds of projects. We heard from different representatives from Ayala, from Engie, from Econoserve, looking at the ESCO market. We've considered it from a range of different angles, the building sector, the banking sector, and so on. Then we've thought about what can be done using some of those models around the world and start to build up a picture of what needs to happen. So this afternoon, it's really time to put your own minds to work on this. And I'm going to give you a chance. We're going to have really the opportunity to get your views that will be very useful in going ahead from here to plan and think about the different actions that could be taken to support the industry. So this will be taken away to actively input into that process. So we are going to organize into some small group discussions that you'll be able to have together around some key questions. To kick off that discussion and to help in getting your thinking going after eating, you'll probably feel, a little bit time to relax. But to get back into that discussion, I'm going to ask someone that you've heard about quite a bit already. I would say very much a kind of a figure that looms large in energy efficiency in the Philippines, not just in the Philippines, but very well known outside of the Philippines also from his many international roles. So Alexander Ablaza, supported by Mikhail Yaro, who's the president, and I've forgotten your title from Climagy. Sorry, but you guys representing probably the leading model of doing this in the Philippines. And I've asked Alex and Mikhail to just say a few words to sharpen up our thinking, maybe explain the model that's running right now here in the country, and sharpen up thinking about what it is that's stopping you and your institution from going further in this energy efficiency financing space. So Alex, please go ahead. You have a after lunch audience.
Having served as a energy efficiency anchor for the Asian Development Bank, so working across Asia. And then I moved over to IFC, with the Global Climate Finance unit in DC. And then I was outposted to Hong Kong to handle the climate finance investments portfolio for IFC, which is the private sector investment arm of the World Bank. And this gave me a lot of blessed experience of working with banks, pushing energy efficiency lending across Asia. So I've worked with Chinese banks. I've worked with tier 1, tier 2 banks in China. I've worked with banks in India. I work with banks in Thailand, in Vietnam, in Indonesia, in the Philippines. We had 2 here, BDO and BPI. And then, we're stretching it even further beyond Central and West Asia. And when I left the development banking world, I felt that something really was missing. That there was no aggregator of energy efficiency projects that would flow equity capital outside the balance sheets of energy efficiency projects. It also made me realize that majority of ESCOs do not have suitable access to bank lending to pursue their energy efficiency project pipeline. So how do we solve this? Create an aggregator. And that is the solution that I am presenting to you in the next 7 to 10 minutes. This is not something that's proposed. This is something that's existing. This is something that could work with your financial institutions. It's ready to work with your ESCOs. It's ready to work with end users. So if someone from the tech team could start to flash my slides, I hope they receive my slides. There you go. So it's the Pioneer Private Sector Aggregator. You saw this morning that there was another private sector aggregator in Canada. But Climagy could be one of the first or one of the pioneer aggregator or super ESCO in emerging markets. And this is the innovation. This is the innovation that we bring to the table. And the first in Asia is right in this country, the Philippines. Next slide, please. While we're waiting for the next slide, I am accompanied by Gorby, Mikhail Yado. He heads our investment operations. And Christine Canonizado, she runs everything else in the office and keeping our company moving like a clock. The Philippines, borrowing the figure of the Philippine Energy Efficiency Alliance, which I head. And by the way, the Philippine Energy Efficiency Alliance welcomes banks. We have a third membership category for financial institutions. And Climergy is part of that third membership category. So PE2 believes that there's the investment gap for energy efficiency across end-use sectors, across the demand side, is $243 billion in the next 2 decades. So this is 12 trillion pesos of energy efficiency capital. And I am willing to, and this is an emerging theory, and I see this in more and more countries, maybe not all, but in most of Southeast Asia, the capital requirement for energy efficiency is more than double that of renewable energy. More than double. So the 12 trillion that you see here through 2040 is more than double what the country will need to mobilize as capital compared to renewable energy. And you see that about 2/3 of this will have to flow through innovative schemes, through innovative structures, modalities, vehicles, financial products, ideally outside the balance sheet of the end user. And this is what we call the off-balance sheet finance, the off-balance sheet investments or capital flows. So 2/3 of 12 trillion is 8 trillion. 8 trillion will have to flow through ESCO performance contracts, will have to flow through public-private partnership transactions, will have to flow through government-led large-scale retrofit or replacement programs. Do you remember the Palit Ilaw, when they started collecting your incandescent bulbs and replacing with CFLs? India, they're doing that big time. And we had David Morgado explain what they were doing. So they were replacing street lighting by the several thousands. They were replacing irrigation pumps. They were pushing out LED lamps in households. So you can imagine what if you did large-scale government programs outside, replacing technologies outside the balance sheet of the households, of small businesses, of SMEs, of the middle market, of corporates. Then you stand a better chance of mobilizing the 8 trillion portion of the 12 trillion. And even though it's off-balance sheet finance, banks still play a large role because the PPP proponents will need to borrow from a bank. The BOT or the government program will need to mobilize debt finance as well. So it's the aggregation that will make an entity more creditworthy and not just the ESCO, because the ESCO lacks in creditworthiness. Next slide, please. So the market players look at it differently. ESCO see huge market opportunity. They see a huge portion of in the industrial sector, in the transport sector. You know, just a few days ago, there was a Philippine Association. There's a lot of effort right now, and this is something that we all have to look. Transport sector is not talked about. We talk about transport sector, but it's limited to EVs. You know the big potential that's existing right under our noses right now? You see most of our ferry vessels are using bunker, okay? It's lucky if there's some of them are using diesel. Now there's a move right now with the World Bank and other, they're doing the studies right now. Not only are they trying to improve maritime security, safety, but they are trying to improve the energy efficiency. So a Philippine Association of Coastal and Inland Ferry Vessels approached me and said, Alex, what can we do to push hybrid diesel in ferry vessels, in RoRo vessels, in big navigation inter-island vessels? What can we do to push EVs? And I understand ADB just processed a loan for electric boats in Thailand. Okay, so what can we do in the maritime industry? That's huge. Now, debt and equity providers, we all got that sense. Energy efficiency is a different animal. It's more abstract. I have to hire an energy efficiency consultant. So it's higher transaction cost, very modern returns. So between if you're a loan officer, between a 400 million peso loan and a 100 million peso energy efficiency project, this one is for factory expansion. Which one will you process first? The 400 million peso loan redevelopment, right? So it meets your quota, you deliver, and it's something that's simpler and more tangible to the loan officer, to your credit committee, to your risk management people. For the end users, let's say before the law was signed in 2019, energy efficiency was not core business. Energy efficiency was a nice to have, green, sustainable activity, but it was not core business. So I would preserve my capital budgets for core business, for raw materials, for labor, for a new process line. But energy, replace a boiler that still works, replace chiller that still works, that can wait for 2026. And for climate investors, many of the MDBs like to flow chunks of money in $50 and $100 million tranches. But the problem is energy efficiency is sub $2 million in size on the average, or even much smaller than $1 million. So there's a huge disconnect. Next slide, please. One finding across Asia, and this is working with ESCOs in India, in China, in Southeast Asia, up to 98% of ESCOs in Asia do not have suitable access to bank lending to pursue their pipeline. Let's say a typical medium-sized ESCO has 20 projects, let's say, in its pipeline. But so it borrows from the bank for its first project loan, it borrows from the bank, second project loan, and finally it succeeds to get a third project loan. And then the bank realizes, oops, you've maxed your credit limit. You're not credit worthy. Your capitalization is too low. Your cash flows are still too thin. You are not credit worthy enough for a fourth loan. So what happens to projects 4 to 20? They don't get implemented. The poor ESCO has to wait for its 10-year money to flow back into its treasury for it to pursue the rest of the pipeline. And those project opportunities would have disappeared by that time. So it's the lack of credit worthiness of ESCOs that is a main problem. To debt finance, because of the mere structure, the mere organization, the mere capitalization of ESCOs. They're small entities. They're SMEs. They're not large corporates. NG is an exception. NG is definitely not an SMEs. But for the vast majority of ESCOs in Asia, not just the Philippines, they are SMEs. There are no aggregators in the country until a super ESCO is built, like Climergy. There's no aggregator. Nobody's bundling the projects together across ESCOs, across customers to make it creditworthy for a bank, to make it bankable or investable by an equity partner. Third, there's nobody de-risking or supporting the upfront cost of an investment-grade energy audit. Do you know what was talked about? We're not only requiring level 2 audit, we're requiring level 3. It's not just detailed energy. We're requiring an IGA, investment-grade audit. And the cost of an investment-grade audit is hitting 7-digit in peso figures. So who's going to pick up that cost? That upfront cost of an investment-grade energy audit. Is it the ESCO? Is it the host entity? But the host entity doesn't want even to cough up money for its capex. So what more so for the investment-grade audit? So that's a dilemma there. And lastly, while you see a lot of solar farms, wind farms, you see a lot of rooftop solar developers. So private capital, you see the big energy conglomerates, most of them now have some solar portfolio. So you see private capital already moving at a steady velocity towards renewables, towards the 20,000 megawatt target of 2040. But energy efficiency has a bigger target. of 45,900 megawatts by 2040 of avoided or deferred infrastructure upgrades, whether it's in generation, transmission, distribution, production. So while private sector capital is moving towards renewables, there's very little private capital moving towards energy efficiency, the new asset class in the clean energy. You know, there was talk about it's also SDG 7. People think, you know, maybe not in this room, but people think that when they see the word clean energy, it's just renewables. Energy efficiency is the main pillar alongside renewables. Those are siblings, okay? Energy efficiency and renewable energy are both clean energy forms, okay? So do not mistake clean energy is just renewables. Clean energy transition, clean energy strategy, clean energy roadmap, clean energy investment class includes energy efficiency. Next slide. So for the ESCOs, we are able to get them to focus on what they do best. You know, majority of the ESCOs, they're SMEs. No? So it's a good electrical engineer, mechanical engineer teaming up, and then they deliver the project. Unfortunately, they're not good financial engineers, so they don't know how to recapitalize their business. But they're very good in energy savings. So they need to be housed. It's like a good doctor. A good doctor to perform at his best will have to be housed under a multi-service hospital with good OR, good diagnostic equipment, etc., etc. So if he's housed under that capital structure, they are able to optimize the talent of the ESCOs. And this is what the ESCOs need. Let them develop more projects, optimizing their brain power on how to harvest this indigenous resource called waste energy. It's all wasted. If we have 45,900, if we have 182 million tons of oil equivalent that we can harvest sitting right under our nose and we don't have to import it. And for commercial and building owners, you know, many of them, like the large corporates, they'll say, oh, the CFO will tell me, we can program budgets for this. But you ask them, when can you program a budget to replace your boiler, your chiller, or your motors? They'll say 2026. So what Climergy actually allows them to do is to schedule it much sooner so that they comply with the law. They are able to comply with their green scorecard targets and implement energy efficiency projects without delay. Next slide. So we are that super ESCO. We will work across like 50 contracts owning the project assets. There was mention of build, own, operate, and transfer, and that's exactly what we will do. So we are the direct customer of ESCOs, and our indirect customers would be the host entities, the commercial buildings, the industrial plants, flowing off balance sheet capital, flowing know-how to a portfolio of projects. Next slide. And we are on the road to completing our first, raising up to $108 million for our initial investment tranche in the Philippines. And we are looking at these targets of, let's say, up to 3 terawatt hours of avoided generation through 2040. We're looking at the avoided generation at source as if we were building or avoiding a 55 megawatt coal-fired power plant with this investment tranche. We're looking up to 2 gigatons of CO2, which could add to the country's obligations under the Paris Climate Agreement. We're looking at the creation of 2,000 to 4,000 jobs. I'd like to mention that energy efficiency, especially in the building sector, is the most labor-intensive activity in the energy sector, outsizing the labor intensity of renewables, oil and gas, and power industry. So we create more jobs for every $1 million that we invest. And this is demonstrated by several countries already. So in a time of post-pandemic business and economic recovery, we have to push out more energy efficiency if we want to create more jobs in the countryside. Next slide. So we have 2 buckets of jobs. The first list, and my apologies for the small font, The first list that you see there, the energy savings performance contracts. These are typically $1 million to $5 million in size. And these are the chilled water plant upgrades. These are high efficiency motors, compressed air, motors, and the like, including lighting. And then these are structured usually as shared savings performance contracts. The second bucket are the relatively bigger ticket items. And these are the waste heat recovery, district cooling, district heating projects. And these are maybe in the $10 to $30 million in size. Next slide. And this is how a typical structure would look like. We will create an SPV in the middle. We would flow equity capital with our equity partner. There will be no contract relationship between ESCO and the host entity, whether commercial or industrial, and have back-to-back arrangements with an energy service agreement with the host entity and an energy savings performance contract with an ESCO. So this one, the host entity or the building owner need not cap up. Now, the opportunity there is, what if you had corporate borrowers, right? What if we can add an energy efficiency component to your existing loan, especially if the loan is for redevelopment of their property? Let's say they're refurbishing a building, they're refurbishing an industrial complex, and the like. So what if there's an energy efficiency? We could provide that equity and carve it out of that project. Next slide. Last December, we entered into a landmark joint partnership agreement with the Lopez Group, the First Philippine Holdings Pi Energy. This is a new unit. We agreed to combine our knowledge, to combine our network, to combine our capital, so that together we pursue a portfolio of projects. So this is the first energy conglomerate that recognizes energy efficiency as a distinct asset class in their clean energy operations. So this is Pi Energy of the Lopez Group. Next slide. And with the support of the Southeast Asia Energy Transition Partnership, or ETP, we are able now to roll out more investment grade audits, to de-risk investment grade audits, because we are able to subsidize the 7-digit cost that otherwise the ESCO or the host entity would have to cough up in preparing the energy efficiency projects. So we expect that out of this grant facility supported by ETP, we'll be able to subsidize anywhere from 11 to 15 IGAs in the next 2 to 3 years. So this is something that we're actually celebrating today together with our friends from ETP, and we would like to get the word across that we're ready to deploy these subsidies to support investment grade audits of energy efficiency projects. And my colleague Gor Villado is here. If you want to meet us privately or separately to brainstorm on how we can work together, we're here to present the solution. So this is an existing solution. It's operational. It's ready to work with you, collaborate with you, with your end user, whether you're a bank, whether even your bank headquarters building. Let's do the energy audit and start an energy efficiency project. So thank you for your time, and happy to receive your questions or comments or suggestions.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, and thanks for sharing all your wisdom and for all you've done to progress this issue. It's really groundbreaking and leading as an example, and terrific to see it happening right here in the Philippines. So fantastic work. I don't know if there's any questions for Alex right now. I am keen to move on to make sure that we get chance to, you'll be staying for until the break and so on? I think probably many of you have things you're wondering about how Climagy's done it, or at least the model that they're using and operating, as Alex says, right now, not a hypothetical in the future, but it's happening right now. So I would like to move on to the part of the meeting, which is now your turn. We've promised you that you would have a chance to input, and it is very important that we hear what you think about all of this. So now it's time. Hopefully your lunch is inside, you've been inspired by the work that's going on, and you're ready to start thinking about this. So in the next 20 minutes or so. I'm going to ask you to discuss some questions amongst yourselves. I'm going to ask some of you to stand up and reorganize a little bit because we have a big group here and we need to reorganize. This is a chance to meet some other people, your colleagues from within the banking industry. But if I can have a couple of people move from there to join this table, and we'll spread out so that we're in groups of around 4 people per table, that would be fantastic. So if you'd like to get up and start to organize yourselves in that way, you have 3 questions to answer. 1, where do you think your industry is on this journey? And what are the obstacles to going further on the journey as an industry in thinking about this? So I'm talking about banking sector regulations, practices, understandings, awareness. So that's the first question. The second question, what is it that's restricting or limiting your own organization? So now I'm thinking internally within your organization. What are those things that are maybe you're not sure of, or that there needs to be more information provided, or changes that need to happen? Okay, so that's the second question. The third question is then, what are the first priorities that you think need to change? So I'll make sure that we have that available for you, but there's 3 questions, as I said. 1, the industry. Where is the industry at in its journey? And what is maybe needing to happen to accelerate progress? The whole session is about accelerating progress. Secondly, your own organization, your own bank. What is it that you see in your own role, in your own work, that stops you from taking further steps? And then the third one, what is the first thing that you would like to change? What is the most important priority to change? So if we can organize into more even groups, let's have some people from this table in the middle here, moving over here. I think you guys are almost the right size. What we're going to do is we have some time for discussion now. Then I'm going to come back and we can share from each table what you talked about and your answer to those 3 questions. Okay, so if we could have you reorganize now, I'm going to call you back together around 2:35 and we'll report back on that. So around 20 minutes.
Hey, Mark, this is Tom Dreesen. Can you hear me?
I can. Hello, Tom.
Yeah, I've been listening the whole time, been killing me to be quiet. So I just got a quick question to don't know where to inject it or perhaps get it, but I think it would be an interesting question for Alex to answer. I mean, his model's quite keen in that it's able to overcome a lot of the problems with banks not having knowledge of EE projects and the IGA process and everything. So he's already up that learning curve, which is fantastic. But I still think there's a fundamental barrier that he still is going to face that financial institutions have, and then that is collateralizing their payments from savings. That's still going to be a problem no matter whether it's an ESCO, a financing entity, whatever. So I'm just kind of curious what his thoughts are and if he's got any innovative ways to collateralize those savings payments, because as we all know in the developing markets, that's one of the bigger challenges with an industrial customer and everything else. They're very willing to let you invest in their facility, identify their projects. And if you can get them comfortable to pay from savings, that's great. But at the end of the day, you got to get them to pay. And in many cases, you know, what I've learned the hard way, and I'm sure Alex has too, the way you get them to pay is you've got to be able to create pain if they don't pay. You can't just rely on the legal system and your legal documentation for repayment. So I guess that was one of the key questions of how does he view his Climbergees? What is their strategy for perhaps reducing or coming up with a different way to collateralize those savings payments, which is critical?
It's a really good question. Can I hold it off until we open?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw it out there. I don't know what the timing is with your plans. I just thought.
I want to get people talking. I want to get people contributing, and it's time to start giving us back your views on everything you've heard. So please organize yourselves as quickly as you can into some groups. We'll get the discussion underway on those 3 questions, which I can also organize to get on the screen for you if it helps.